Karen Reed, cop killer or cop girlfriend? In episode 4, we're going to take a look at the evidence that demands a verdict. Hey, we're going to put you in the jury seat to make your own decision. This and more on this episode of Charlie Crime Buster. Well, it's what some people are calling the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. Charlie Crime Buster, CharlieCrimeBuster.com, and PeacemakerNetwork.com are copyrights owned by Charlie Crime Buster. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another Charlie Crime Buster episode. Glad to have you on board the Charlie Crime train today. As always, if you're a new listener and we have them every week, we encourage you to reach out with a shout out. Reach me, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Ask questions, make suggestions, even lodge objections. It is a safe place. If you have some ideas for some coming episodes, just send them our way. We'll take a look at it. Again, that's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, if you'd like to support the program, going over to peacemakernetwork.com, peacemakernetwork.com. You can read all about how we support the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. Of course, we're talking about military, talk about first responders and law enforcement. We support those, and you can be a part of that as well. So again, go to peacemakernetwork.com. If you'd like to get caught up on other episodes, and we have a ton of them out there, then going over to our website. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Now we wanted to get through our housekeeping a little quick because we got a lot of stuff to share with you today. It was in the early morning hours of January the 29th back in 2022. That's when Officer John O'Keefe of the Boston Police Department, well, he was found outside the home of Boston Police Officer Brian Albert, there in Canton, Massachusetts. Now O'Keefe, he had been dropped off the night before by his girlfriend Karen Reed, and then they were going to join an after party after they had been out bar hopping, and that party was hosted by Brian Albert and Jennifer McCabe. Now, upon being discovered there that next morning in the snow, he was transported to a local hospital, and there, unfortunately, he died. Cause of death, blunt force trauma and hypothermia. Well, just 3 days later, Karen Reed, she was arrested, charged with manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, and leaving the scene of a deadly crash. And the county district's attorney office, they said that, they alleged that Reed hit O'Keefe with her SUV and then that she left the scene. Now, we do know that Reed pleaded not guilty. Then 4 months later, June the 9th, she was actually indicted by a grand jury for second-degree murder, motor vehicle manslaughter, and driving under the influence and leaving the scene of a deadly crash. And again, Reed pleaded not guilty. But then her defense attorney, David Yannetti at that time, accused the Massachusetts State Police of manufacturing evidence in the investigation. He also alleged that the lead investigator, Trooper Michael Proctor, had a conflict of interest due to his own family's relationship with some of the prosecution's witnesses. Now, we all know that after both the prosecution and the defense rested their case, the jury now was unable to come to a conclusion on the case, and the case did end up as a mistrial. Not the kind of mistrial we covered in the Allen Baldwin case, the Russ case. You see, this one was not with prejudice, meaning that they could try the case again, and they plan to. So today we're going to take you to the jury seat as we describe evidence presented in this case. But before we do that, let me let you get caught up a little bit of what's been happening in the case since the mistrial. We now know, breaking news, there will be a new prosecutor on this next case. A guy by the name of Hank Brennan. And by the way, his past clients, ever heard of the name James Whitey Bugler, the gangster? Well, Whitey, yep, he actually represented Whitey. And he's going to now lead the prosecution as a special assistant district attorney. He's a former prosecutor in Suffolk County. Now, he's going to work the Reed case alongside the others that worked this case earlier. Now, the Norfolk District Attorney, Michael Morsey, said some good things about this new prosecutor. He said that Brennan is, quote, esteemed, has a great reputation, has decades of experience, and is familiar, listen to this, with, quote, unquote, complex law enforcement matters. Boy, I'd love to know what he meant by complex law enforcement matters, wouldn't you? Makes you want to scratch your head. Now, I did hear that he wanted justice for John O'Keefe, but he also emphasized fairness and that he would follow the evidence where it leads him. Does this mean that he thinks if there's not enough evidence to convict Karen Reed, he'll dismiss the case? What do you think about it? Hey, reach out with a shout out. That would be great to hear from you. So, my friend, we're going to get into what the defense and what the prosecution says the evidence is in this case. But before you do, we're going to share with you a little story. We actually try to lighten the load by sharing a crazy crook story. And so now we're going to take just a moment before we get to the evidence to share with you Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, an Indiana woman, she seemed to think that she did nothing wrong. No, I didn't do anything wrong, except what? Yeah, still in the car in order to travel to an interview for a stripper job. That's right. That's what case of Shelton 20. She acted like this was just a joke, did not understand she's going to be arrested for it. That's according to the police department. They had actually received a call about a theft of a 2013 Kia Optima that was actually taken from a car dealership. That's what WTTV reported. An employee claimed that they were preparing to arrange for Shelton to take a test drive, but they were distracted because the dealership kept getting phone calls. No one really seemed to be at the other end of the line. Now the employee said Shelton wait while they went to answer another phone call. That's when she drove off with the Kia. Camera showed the vehicle easily traced to Shelton. She actually filled out a form on the dealership's website. And she went down toward Indianapolis and later returned back to the town there. And when the officer showed up at her home, she lied about who she was. But then she admitted to stealing the car, driving 60 miles to Indianapolis to interview for a job as an exotic dancer. Claimed it wasn't a big deal. After all, she returned the vehicle. Yet the documents say she actually left the vehicle with keys inside in a parking lot next door to the dealership. Yet the people at the dealership, they said that car wasn't found immediately. Actually, it was found some ways away, 20 miles away. And of course, Shelton said, I don't know what happened to it after I left it, She said she did see some, she said BS Snapchat. Well, she was arrested on felony charges of auto theft, identity deception, and she faces up to 2.5 years in prison if convicted. So this crazy woman who stole a car from a dealership to attend a job interview for a stripper job and thought she could get away with it. Well, she does indeed become Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, our title today is Evidence that Demands a Verdict. In a sense, this is what happens to every trial when a judge turns the proceedings over to the jury. So here is the evidence. Look at it, talk about it, and then tell us what your verdict is based on the evidence. That's kind of what the judge says. Now, in closing arguments, both sides summarized their evidence. It took them both about an hour. No way I can share with you in 9 weeks of trial and 70 witnesses what they said about this, but I'm going to share with you things that stood up as possible evidence to consider. And you can make your own decision about what really happened. Now, the prosecution has the burden of proof, so they get the last word. So we're going to begin sharing the evidence first that the defense put on, and then the evidence that the prosecution put on. Her attorney, Michael Jackson, he began his close repeating one phrase. That phrase, look the other way, look the other way. And this reference was a point to the lead investigator and others that were alleged by Jackson was alleged to be part of a cover-up of a crime that was committed not out there on the road with Karen Reed hitting John O'Keefe, but really in the home of Sergeant Albert, where John O'Keefe's body was found on that lawn. He would say, look the other way when it comes to a conflict of interest. That reference was being that the lead investigator, Michael Proctor of the state police, was friends with the Albert family, even to the point of being a part of the wedding party, sitting at the same table with the bride and groom. Look the other way, Jackson says, regarding early morning phone calls that went out from all the family that was later described as butt dials, many butt dials, even to the point that those butt dials were answered. Look the other way when the homeowner, well, on that early morning, he did not even come out of the house when old John O'Keefe was found on the lawn. Look the other way when the lead investigator was biased against the defendant, even to the point that he sent rude, lewd, horrible texts out to his friends about the defendant, even making fun of her medical condition, telling everybody she was a cunt, telling others he would make this case cut and dry. See, those were private texts. He did not think they would be read in the courtroom, but they were. Look the other way when the homeowner of the house where the defense is claiming that John O'Keefe was beat up, well, where that homeowner, after this happened, gets rid of his phone, gets rid of the dog that could have made the marks on John O'Keefe's body, a dog that had been a family pet for years but was rehomed, even got rid of his house by selling it at a loss. Look the other way when it is implied by the lead investigator that the cop owner of the house, well, he implied that the cop owner would not get into any so-called, quote, shit for his own actions. And as far as the stormy relations between Reed O'Keefe that the prosecution pointed out at the beginning of the case, he said there were witnesses that night that said that they were getting along fine. One even said that his significant other had said to him, why don't you treat me as good as John treats her? And as far as the angry messages, voicemails left that night from Karen to O'Keefe, well, Jackson says that, well, at first she was angry that he was not back home when he was supposed to be back home for his children. Then she was frustrated that she could not reach him. And then he says the messages turned into full-blown panic when she thought something could have happened to him. After all, he says, it's understandable. Every couple has arguments. Every couple has ups and downs. If we arrested everybody that had an argument, I guess the jails would be full. That's what he implied. He then mentions that if O'Keefe was actually hit by Karen Reed by her SUV and was on the lawn that morning, all that morning, why didn't the snowplow driver that went by the resident time after time, not once, not twice, but 3 times, passed by that residence and did not see a body on the lawn? Again, look the other way. Look the other way. Not only that, but why didn't the investigators even reach out to the snowplow driver? They would have known that a snowplow had gone by, but they did not even bother to interview him, all because Jackson is inferring that it was all a cover-up. Look the other way. Then he goes on to say, why did not the people that were actually parked behind Karen O'Reed that night before she drove away, why did they not see a body, and why did they not see John O'Keefe? Referring to that O'Keefe had already gone into the house. And then he brings up that John O'Keefe's digital footprint showed that at 12:21 a.m., instead of being out there on the side of the road hit by Karen Reed, but it was indicated that he descended about 80 steps. And that as you went into the house of Albert, well, there were steps that immediately went down to the basement, indicated that John O'Keefe was in that house. He also brought out the timing of a text message, supposedly from someone in the house, Jennifer McCabe. That text, get this, just after 2 a.m. in the morning, she texts how long for a body to die in the code. Folks, that was huge. If she texted that at that time, it meant that she thought O'Keefe's body was out in the snow, lying there in the front yard. This was hours before he was even found in the front yard. It supported the defense belief that he was beaten up in the house, not hit by Karen's SUV. Also, it was pointed out that at the party, There was a time when the homeowner and his police pal Brian Higgins were not noticeable upstairs with the rest of the party, which could have been the time O'Keefe was beaten in the basement of the house. Also, that dog, that big dog that's talked about in this case, he was not seen in the above house, indicating the dog was probably in the basement as well, which would have given him an opportunity to bite the arms of John O'Keefe. He does mention in the early morning calls to John's cell phone from people within that house. Yep. And the witnesses reported again, surprise, 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 it was butt dials. But the defense says it could have been them attempting to locate his phone so they could place it with his body when they placed his body out on the lawn. That was brought to the yard later that morning. He mentions how suspicious it was for the other Brian Higgins, to leave the party that morning and go to the Canton Police Department. Early in the morning, he was not on duty. Why did he go to the police department that time of the morning? And in his attorney's mind, in Jackson's mind, he was tempted. The Higgins was trying to find out if the Canton PD had any reports yet about this serious injuries of John O'Keefe. And there was, yes, even then, you guessed it, another butt dial, this time from Brian Albert to Brian Higgins. Lasted about 22 seconds. Jackson said some people said that's enough time for a conversation, but then he takes those 22 seconds and plays it out. Says something like this: hey, do you know anything at the station? Do the police know anything? No, good. Come on back to the house. That was even less than those 22 seconds. He points out that the lies that McCabe told about seeing Karen Reed in her SUV from 12:29 a.m. to 12:50 a.m. She testified under oath, I was watching her outside in front of the resident from 12:29 to 12:50 a.m. He points out that's impossible. It was a lie. Because you see, Karen Reed, she was placed on John O'Keefe's own Wi-Fi back at his house at 12:36 a.m. No way possible that Karen could have been looking at Karen's SUV from 12:36 to 12:50 a.m. if she was back there at John's house at 12:36 a.m., only 5 minutes away. You see, these lies and suspicious activity by the people all related to the house points up, according to Jackson, to lies and a cover-up to protect the people who really beat police officer John O'Keefe. He also mentions the term magic hair, refers to a hair that was found on the bumper of Karen's SUV, that it was a possible match to the victim, John O'Keefe. He calls it a magic hair because he says, how could a hair stay intact on a bumper that had been driven throughout the night in a raging blizzard? He states that hair, as well as parts of Karen's taillight, were all planted evidence to protect another police officer from charges by the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, who was close friends to the Albert family. And we all know now that Michael Proctor has been suspended without pay from the state police. Jackson went on to say the Canton Police Department that began the investigation did not find any of the taillight that they said was about his body when they were early part of the investigation. No taillight found, nothing found until Proctor, the close family friend of Albert, took charge of the investigation. He went on to point out how Proctor was sharing information with people about the case who should not have been a part of the investigation. How he spent very little time interviewing any of the other people in the case, but focused only on Karen Reed to pin the case on her. He did not interview Brian Albert, the other cop immediately on the case. He did not go into the house where the defense says O'Keefe was beaten up. He did not go in there, did not get a search warrant, did not search the house, did not look for any evidence, only focused on Reed. Talked about how evidence logs were not followed in the case. Obvious sloppy police work. But he attributed that sloppy police work as nothing more than covering up for evidence, planting other evidence. And then the defense brings the experts to the stands. Most interesting, two people from the company that studies car crashes for the Department of Defense and other people. ARCA Crash. And the reconstructionist, Daniel Wolf, who's known as Crash Daddy, he testified that the damage to Reed's taillight was inconsistent with striking a human head or an arm. Wolf further said a person could not be propelled if they were struck only in the arm. You see, Massachusetts State Police Trooper Joseph Paul, He said that O'Keefe was projected several feet following the alleged collision with Reed's SUV. Wolf says no. And his biochemical engineer and accident reconstructionist, the other one, Dr. Rentschler, he testified that O'Keefe's head's injuries was not consistent with having been struck by a vehicle at 24 miles per hour. And his crash analysis, well, Paul says that Reed accelerated that reverse, reached a speed of 24 miles per hour. But these two experts, these scientific experts who had degrees in physics and science, they said not so. No, it is not consistent. He said there was not enough evidence to find specific cause of O'Keefe's fatal head injuries. And then there was Dr. Frank Sheridan. She's the former chief medical examiner for California area. She testified that his injuries could be consistent with a physical altercation and that those wounds in his arm, well, may have come from an animal attack. So that's the summary of the defense closing arguments. Now for the prosecution. Well, much like the defense, he started off with a phrase. Remember the phrase that the defense was look the other way? Well, the prosecution, they had a phrase too. Here's their phrase. I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. They pointed out to individuals who testified hearing Karen Reed said this, 4 of them. I hit him. Now, in the prosecution closing, he points out that Karen Reed and John O'Keefe were in a rocky point in their relationship. He used the text to prove that they were in a stormy time. Even brought O'Keefe's children in to say that O'Keefe had said that the relationship had run its course. He pointed out the voicemails where she railed and called O'Keefe a pervert, said, I hate you, I hate you. Pointed out the 53 attempts that night to reach O'Keefe that morning. He also reminded the jury of Trooper Paul's testimony that found the SUV going in reverse at 24 miles per hour. That stated that it hit O'Keefe. He spun him counterclockwise, fell back, hit his head on the curb, and then she left him to die in the freezing snow. He pointed out that there was glass from the cocktail glass and pieces of taillight was found around John O'Keefe as he was lying injured in the snow. That's where the defense had said that it was planted, but he said it was there. He even pointed out the fact that the phone was found under John O'Keefe's body, and it was visible there because the snow had piled up on his body that day. He points out how Reed was easily able to make out O'Keefe's body that next morning. Even though it was dark and snowy, while she was with other people, she immediately went to his body. He took the text message that was attributed to McCabe early morning when it said that she had searched for how long for a body to die in the cold. He said it was really from a search engine that was open early on in the morning, but that the text was actually later in the morning around 6 o'clock when they found the body, and that Karen Reed had even asked her to find out how long a body could live in the cold, not at 2:20-something in the morning, but at 6 a.m. in the morning. He pointed out that Karen Reed also asked a firefighter that morning, how long could a body live in the cold, pointing out that it was Karen who wanted to know that information. That much more lines up on that text being at 6 in the morning instead of at 2-something in the morning that some other expert had testified her phone said that it was at 2. In other words, the defense says it was after 2 a.m. in the morning. The prosecution says it was after 6 a.m. in the morning. And as far as those descending the stairs on John's digital footprint that the defense brought out, well, the prosecution says John and Reed were driving down to Albert's residence about that same time, and they were going down 2 hills. And it wasn't his body going down the steps, but it was them descending down those 2 hills before they got to the residence. In other words, it wasn't John going down the stairs, but driving down 2 hills. And in regards to that big elephant in the room, Michael Proctor, well, he points out that Proctor thought that his personal text would have been private. And while there was no excuse for those kind of statements about the suspect, he says it did not compromise the investigation that was made by not only Proctor, but a number of state police investigators that all pointed to the fact that Karen Reed hit O'Keefe with her vehicle. He also pointed out those private texts. There was no mention of a cover-up, no discussion of evidence framing. While they were distasteful, he says it was still Reed who was the guilty one here, who hit Keefe with the SUV. And regarding that medical expert who said the injuries were consistent with a dog bite, the quote is from her, number one, I'm not 100% sure about this, but my initial reaction when I saw this photograph is it was probably an animal. Most likely, I would say a dog. So there's actually experts on both sides of the coin. Experts that say, hey, it is consistent, and some say it's not consistent. And juries have to weigh all of these when it comes to their decision. Now, we know that in this particular case, that the jury could not come to a total decision on the case. It was declared a mistrial. But what about your decision? I would love to hear from you. What do you think really happened to John O'Keefe that morning? Is it as simple as the fact that she put her SUV in reverse and came back at 24 miles per hour, hit him, spun him around, his head hit the curb? But think about that a moment. If that was the case, how did he end up some 10 feet away in the yard instead of at the curb? Did he bounce up there? Some things that make you say, well, wonder how that happened. So who is right here? Who is guilty here? What about your decision? I'd love to hear from you what you have to say as your own vote as the guilt of Karen Reed, who was charged in this case. Guilty or not guilty? Was there a cover-up? There were certainly some suspicious activities, were they not? These guys get rid of their phone, sold their house, got rid of the dog, rehomed it. Were they trying to hide something? Or were they just saying, hey, we don't want our privacy invaded anymore? What was the reason for all that? Who is the guilty one? Reach out with a shout out. CharlieCrimebuster@gmail.com. CharlieCrimebuster@gmail.com. Hey, I want to invite you to join us on YouTube. We're going to discuss this. James Buckland and I, our producer, we're going to discuss this case. We're going to discuss this episode. We're going to discuss evidence that demands a verdict. And you know what? I'm going to give you my take on it. I'm going to give you what I would have done if I was on that jury and heard that evidence like I shared with you today. I'm going to give you my take on it while we discuss it on the YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube at Charlie Crimebuster. YouTube at Charlie Crimebuster. Join us as James and I discuss this episode this coming week. Well, there you have it. As again, I can't share it all. I mean, there was like 70 witnesses, 9 weeks of trial. But I give you a summary of both sides. Who do you think was responsible for John O'Keefe's death? Was it the girlfriend, Karen Reed, who put her car in reverse, 24 miles per hour and hit him? Or did he go into that residence? Was he beat up in that basement? Did they take him out the back and then around the side of the yard there, place him in the yard as though he had been hit with a car? Did the cops cover this up? Did Michael Proctor take pieces of that tail light that had actually been hit, according to the defense, back at his residence when she was backing out? They showed a video of that where it looked like it could have hit then. Did that crack the tail light, or was it cracked when she hit John O'Keefe? Lots of questions. Where do you come down on it? Join us this week. Charlie Crimebuster, YouTube. YouTube at Charlie Crimebuster. Listen to us as we discuss this episode. Let me know what you think about it. Give me your vote. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.